Hi, I'm John Cuddeback.
And I'm Sofia Cuddeback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
and raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship,
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live.
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Welcome to today's episode, Friendship in Marriage. Can it be what you hoped it would be? I have with me my wife, Sofia. Of course, I don't think I'd want to discuss this with anybody else as opposed to discussing it with Sofia. This is certainly a challenging topic, something I think is very close to many of our hearts, and we certainly know from experience is something that can be very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. As a matter of fact, I feel like friendship in general is kind of a hard and confusing thing for us nowadays. I mean, friendship is such a ubiquitous word. Of course, the social media friends, and then on every level, it seems that friendship seems to disappoint, really, pretty much wherever you look, right or left. And even those places where maybe we're finding a little bit more satisfaction in a friendship, it's maybe not quite exactly what we were hoping for. And so then to talk about friendship in a marriage is like, wow, it's a double whammy. It seems like an extra layer of hard. So I think it's a great topic. I'm really glad we're talking about it today.
And I think part of it in reality is an extra layer of hard, but I think we tend to not recognize that. We probably went into it thinking, maybe not explicitly, but kind of taking for granted that, of course, once we're married, this is going to work out well. And we don't particularly think of it as probably something, at least at the beginning, that we're going to have to work at. Then reality starts to set in, and then we might feel a little bit lost, like, wow, have I been doing something wrong? How do I actually go about this? But
yeah, I think that one of the things that we are so desperately looking for when we're looking for friendship is a certain kind of intimacy with another person. I think we really tend to feel isolated and alone in the world that we live in. And so we crave friendship because for us, I think it means a kind of an intimacy, a place where you're known and you know another. And I think one of the real challenges with marriage is that through kind of the gift of love, of seeing the other when you fall in love, there's kind of almost an immediate intimacy that you don't really have to kind of work out. I mean, obviously there are things you have to work out when you're dating and newly engaged, but it's really kind of this almost euphoric experience of this intimacy maybe that you've been looking for. And this kind of immediate, wow, this person sees me, and wow, I see this other person. And so it's kind of like in marriage, it almost seems like you fall into this thing that you're craving and looking for that you call friendship without having to do any of the hard work or follow any of the steps. And I wonder if that maybe is one of the things that makes it hard once we're married to know how to grow our friendship, to really kind of be a pinnacle of something that we really desire and really want to share with this person we love more than anything else in the world. And then we get frustrated because we're not exactly sure what to do because we never really had to do anything to begin with. You know what I mean? So
I do know what you mean. And I think it's interesting. You use the word intimacy. Obviously, when it comes to talking about marriage, this is a word that's used in different ways. We all as persons are created for and desire intimacy. And then there's the thing that we refer to as marital intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me this is actually an important part of sorting this out. In any case, from a man's perspective, I think that often men like me beforehand are thinking, hey, marriage is going to be great. Perhaps we've been working, by the grace of God, we've been working hard to kind of hold back, waiting for marriage. There's going to be marital intimacy in that more specific sense in marriage. Wow, that's going to be so great. I mean, how wonderful this relationship is going to be. I mean, we're going to be sleeping together every night. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
this is amazing, and not as though a mature man would ever think that it fundamentally just comes down to that, but nonetheless is very much thinking, wow, I mean, this is, again, a little bit of that dream, a little bit of that kind of honeymoon aspect of, this is where that closeness that I'm looking for just kind of naturally happens.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the oh so common disillusionment of what happens?
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder if part of the reason we experience it that way is when we're still engaged, you have this feeling of something's not quite perfect. I feel so close to this person, something's not quite right. And maybe just kind of naively, we conflate that with it's not the full experience that we're going to have when we're able to enjoy marital intimacy. And of course, marital intimacy does add something to your closeness. But I wonder if there's another part of the intimacy that's lacking, that's emotional intimacy that really comes from a forged relationship. And we don't realize that there's something else that we need to be working on and forging, and kind of mistakenly think that the thing that's missing is marital intimacy. And once we
Yeah,
have that,
yeah, yeah,
everything will be
yeah,
solved. So I
yeah.
wonder if that's also part of the reason that we kind of experience a kind of frustration or a kind of being brought up short
Mm-hmm.
when all those
Mm-hmm.
pieces are in place and yet somehow there's still something of the emotional intimacy of friendship
Yeah,
that's missing.
I think that's a great point. You know what that makes me think here. I wonder how often then we understandably make the mistake of thinking that marital intimacy, and again, I'm kind of taking that in the specific
Sure.
sense,
Yeah.
is what's going to help us forge the friendship that we want,
Mm-hmm.
rather than realizing the truth is really the other way around.
Yeah. The
That
friendship.
having forging a friendship of a certain kind is going to be what empowers the kind of marital intimacy that we so badly want. But this doesn't just happen. I mean,
Yeah. I think you're right.
anyone can
Absolutely.
see
Yeah.
engaging in the sexual act does not a friendship make.
Yeah.
This is very, very clear in the world in which we live. So obviously, I mean, so I don't think that we'll necessarily need to focus a lot on marital intimacy here. It certainly is worth another conversation. I mean, right now, more, what is it that most of all constitutes? How do we go about forging
Mm-hmm.
that marital friendship and deal with some of the challenges there? I think is really the focus. And marital intimacy, of course, then very much naturally arise from that, complement that, and be part of that.
Yeah, I think that the perfect place for us to start would be just to talk about what the nature of friendship is, kind of from a philosophical perspective. I know that doesn't sound super exciting at the moment, but for me, when I first started hearing you lecturing on friendship and the philosophical understanding of friendship through St. Aristotle first and St. Thomas, and St. Alred also wrote on friendship, I was just so excited because my experience to that time of friendship was that it's just something pretty volatile and serendipitous. You meet people you really like and you don't end up being friends with them. And then you meet people that, yeah, you don't have that much in common and you kind of end up being better friends. And it just seemed so completely luck of the draw. And it was kind of
Yeah.
confusing and stressful for me. So when I heard you enunciate these principles, for me, it was this moment of, wow, there is actually a principle involved here. This is something that we can strive for. This is something that I can work toward by being more intentional about my own life
Mm-hmm.
and how I interact with other people. So I would love it if you could just share some of those
Great.
principles
Great.
in a nutshell.
Well, when you said a moment ago, this might not sound that exciting. I don't know what you're talking about. It sounds awfully exciting to me. What else is there to talk about that's going to be more exciting than getting some philosophical principles? So all right. Um, what is friendship? Friendship is always some type of shared life, says Aristotle. Two people who get to know one another, starts to have some type of, he says, mutual goodwill towards one another, kind of looking out towards the other, wanting to do something for the other. But this can take very different forms.
Mm-hmm.
And so he makes the fundamental distinction between the famous three: friendship of utility, friendship of pleasure, versus the friendship of virtue, is really the best way to name the third. Can also be called kind of true or fuller friendship.
Mm-hmm.
In all of them, there's a kind of goodwill towards the other, but in the first two, friendship of pleasure, friendship of utility, what you're sharing, and part of the picture here is friendship is always a kind of life sharing of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
The sharing is more shallow.
Mm-hmm.
We enjoy having a good time together. This is more the friendship of pleasure. We are useful to one another. We help one another out in various and sundry ways. This does forge a kind of relationship, you are kind of looking out there. Hey, I want to help the other person. Hey, he helps me. A friendship of utility. This can be done well. This isn't necessarily a crass and abusive relationship, but it's only so deep versus a deeper kind of friendship. So first of all, just start with that kind of, there's the deeper kind. It's a deeper life sharing. It's more rooted in who the other person is, as opposed to we happen to have a good time together. We happen to be useful to one another. It's rooted in something a little more. How are we doing for starters then?
Yeah, I think that's great. I loved that you underscored that the friendship of pleasure and the friendship of utility is not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, obviously, we automatically, when we hear the word utility, we think of using people, and that's not at all what you're talking about. You're talking about two people who are mutually helpful to one another for the sake of the other's good. But it's really, their relationship really is their common place is the aid that they lend to one another. I really like that we're not talking about the first forms of friendship as something that's bad or low. It just becomes a problem if we mistaken those for the friendship of virtue, or we're looking for the satisfaction or the joy that comes from a real friendship of virtue in a friendship of utility, for example, or a friendship of pleasure. I think that's a really important distinction to make.
And it absolutely is. And just for the sake of clarity, Aristotle would say that people of lesser character can have these kind of friendships where it isn't necessarily that they're really getting outside themselves and really looking to the good of the other.
Yeah.
Better people of deeper character, interestingly, not only can they have this third, richer kind of friendship, in a way that no one else can, but they actually have those first two kinds of friendships in a better way.
Yeah,
but
so it seems
that's a topic for
then it sounds like the key there is people of greater character. That if your character is better and greater, the quality of your relationships, of your friendships, is going to actually be better.
Amen. Now, when we apply this then to kind of first the realm, when I'm teaching this to the young people, I like to say, look, you can have a relationship in your life as a friendship of utility or a friendship of pleasure that is a relationship of integrity. It's just not very deep. But I point out that a romantic relationship should never be that. And anytime you're entering into the realm of the romantic by its nature means we're going in the direction of marriage. This isn't kind of romance for the sake of fun, romance for the sake of romance. When you're in that realm of, hey, I'm starting to look towards the other sex and having this kind of special relationship that we kind of naturally incline towards, this is already to get in the genus of marital reality. And of course, one of the things about marriage is it's so going to demand a deeper kind of knowledge, a deeper kind of love, a truer kind of look into the good of the other person. And so a dating relationship can be had by those that are basically just looking to have a good time together. This exists all around us.
Sure.
It is what it is, and it's not what it's not. And in fact, but it's not just, it's a problem. It's a problem because, as you point out, as soon as you get into the realm of the male, female, in the realm of kind of romance, nuptiality, it demands an other-centeredness. Otherwise, right at its root, it's going to be a perversion.
Wow. So, of its nature, the romantic relationship demands a friendship of virtue.
It does. Although here's kind of the drama of it. And we need to kind of say this right up front. You can be married and not have a friendship of virtue. But this is just, it's a little bit of a stark reality. In the end, it's actually, you might even in a funny kind of way say it's part of the gift of what marriage is. There can be a marriage that is a real marriage, a valid marriage, might be a sacramental marriage, where there isn't this kind of deeper connection of soul and the kind of profound looking to the good of the other that is so much called for by this kind of relationship. And you can say, in a sense, demanded, but then again, it can exist in the absence of a developed deeper friendship. And so marriage is not the same as a friendship. Marriage, there's a certain kind of contractual, we can also say in a biblical way, covenantal aspect here. can immediately and necessarily is calling for this deeper friendship, but can exist without it. And again, we see that happen.
Yeah. So that all the more makes me say, okay, well, let's go back to the conversation about what are the characteristics of true friendship, because that actually is kind of a scary and chilling thought to
It
think of a
is.
covenantal merit relationship for life that actually doesn't have the friendship characteristics. So clearly you can have one without the other. So let's talk a little bit more again about, well, what is this friendship? So you said it's the looking toward the good of the other. So as one of the principles of friendship, of
Good.
virtuous
Okay.
friendship. So tell us, what are some of the other characteristics that can be looked for and strived
Good.
for?
All right. And we'll jump right in that. 5 seconds, I just want to first say, and we will circle back to talk about what might one do if that isn't going on
Sure. Yeah.
in a marriage. All right. But right now, let's talk about, what it would take to
Perfect.
make it what we want it to be. And thus we need to understand more about that friendship. So two things that St. Thomas, Aristotle, all the greats say that really set apart that deeper, truer, virtuous kind of friendship is truly knowing the other for who he is, and hand in hand with that, loving the other for who he is. It sounds so simple, but just I never tire of coming back and kind of turning that around before our minds and really thinking about knowing another person is a profound thing, and it's something that very much we see happens by degrees.
Mm-hmm.
And there's knowing another, and there's knowing another. And true friendship really only happens to the extent that we reach a level of knowing another that's rare, that takes a lot to bring it about. So we just need to kind of stand in awe. What does it take to really know another person? Think about this. How often in marriage do we still at times just really can have a scary experience of feeling ourselves as unknown?
Mm-hmm.
Even my beloved is not seeing me.
Mm-hmm.
To not be seen is a scary thing.
Mm-hmm.
It leaves you feeling very isolated, right? To be known well is kind of at the heart of being together with one another. And then just to add in, okay, so knowing the other for who he is, and thus right there hand in hand with that, affirming it with one's will, willing that good, willing the continuance of that good, willing the growth of that good. So the thing I love to picture in this friendship of virtue, and so we're not talking right now per se about marriage, we're talking about any friendship of virtue. You have two people, again, you just picture kind of looking at one another in knowledge, in love. So very much feeling then, experiencing themselves as known and loved in a way that is simply unique in human experience.
Yeah. So that sounds like it's exciting because you're talking about growing in knowledge of the other and growing in your affirmation of them, which it implies a certain kind of degree of growing by steps, which to me also implies that that's something I can pursue, that I can make it my object to how can I know this other person better? How can I affirm them better? And that means I can also take steps to do that. So while, maybe the ideal and perfect friendship is kind of a pinnacle that we hope to reach, it sounds to me like the whole process of growing is also friendship. And
Good.
then I think to
Well said.
myself too, what natural relationship is better suited to that endeavor than marriage? It's permanent and it's persistent, and you have a common work that you share. So it seems like the nature of marriage provides the perfect context in which you can be precisely taking those steps to know the other better, to affirm them better, and to also help the other to know you better and appreciate you better.
I 100% agree. And in agreement with that, though, I'm going to turn it around and look at it from a slightly different angle. It's also the place where it would be far too easy to assume and take for granted that this
Mm-hmm.
is going to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and it just doesn't happen.
Right.
So the interesting thing is in the other friendships in our life, and I'm very glad you emphasized the notion of freedom and choice, and in a deep friendship of any kinds, We have to be choosing to get to know that person and be very intentional about doing it. And likewise, and we can circle back to this is so important in marriage, choosing again and again to love. And this is where the aspect of we, especially in our over romanticized age, where we are presented with love as though love is simply something that happens to you
Yeah.
and that you feel. And so you have very well meaning people kind of having this terrified experience in marriage of, oh my gosh, I'm not feeling the love anymore. And they panic rather than realizing that's exactly the moment where they have the opportunity to choose to love.
Mm-hmm.
Because the willing the good of the other at the end of the day is primarily, not solely, but primarily a matter of something that I freely and continually can choose to do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually kind of a point that actually can give us hope that when you're not feeling love so much, this is actually a great opportunity. Oh, this is where the friendship is of marriage, the relationship in marriage is actually going to go deeper because I have to choose it maybe in a way that
Yeah.
I didn't before. But maybe I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I agree. Marriage is, and Aristotle completely agrees. St. Thomas especially, I say, agrees that marriage is the most naturally suited context to do this, but we're still going to have to be super intentional.
Yeah. And of course, I would imagine that there are going to be particular challenges in pursuing friendship in marriage that might not be the case outside of marriage. But so you said two characteristics of friendship are seeing the good of the other and affirming the good. Are there any other characteristics that we can look for to help us understand better what is this thing that we're trying to pursue?
Great. Thanks for taking us back to that. All right. So to keep on that characteristics of the virtuous friendship, remembering that all friendships are about a shared life together.
Mm.
It's the neat thing about virtuous friendship is primarily gets its name of virtuous friendship because the main way that we share life is in trying to grow in virtue.
Mm.
I'm going to say that again because it's just so amazing that Aristotle saw this. The main way that human persons share a life together, a truly human life, is by trying to help one another achieve the most important thing any human being, naturally speaking, can achieve, the kind of character that we're called to have. So what do friends especially look towards in their love of the other? If you really love the other, you're willing good to the other. What's the true good of the other? The true good of the other, as these great philosophers saw, is their flourishing in virtue. And so that's what you're willing for them. And that's what you want to do with them. And you spend your days working on that. So in short, the principle here is true friends grow in virtue together.
I find that so exciting. I just think that is so beautiful because in a world where being virtuous or working on virtue sounds so like stodgy and not exciting and not glamorous, it's actually this incredible beacon of light because when you described the pursuit of the virtuous life as the person becoming who they most truly are. And so when something is really true, there's no deviation, there's no gray, there's no obscurity. And so if in friendship, what we're working on together, helping one another strive for and achieve is that truth and conforming ourselves to the truth, then there becomes this incredible clarity and the other one really becomes visible to the other and vice versa. So I just think that's just kind of a dramatic and exciting invitation to, that's how I can see the other better. That's how I can become mostly myself, is to actually pursue a life of virtue.
And in a sense, it's downright romantic too. I mean, it doesn't outside of marriage, it has a beautiful a form that's not romantic. But
which is, of course, why in literature, great friendship is something that is breathtaking, almost the way romance is, right? It has that characteristic.
But how often, I wonder, if we ask most people who would be listening to this conversation right now, well, do we recognize that in marriage, key here is that we're helping the other person become who that person should be. I think we all naturally know that, but I think at the same time, concretely, it's very easy to lose sight of that. In other words, am I in our relationship really being intentional about what's supposed to be happening in our relationship and characterizing our relationship? One of the key things about marriage is it is ultimately not just about us. It very much is going to be oriented towards beautiful and wonderful things beyond us, in a special way, our children. But in order to be oriented towards those other things as it should be, it must begin with the foundation of that rich and profound orientation right here between us. And so it is the fire that's burning at the center of a marriage, a desire in each of our hearts to be really looking to see, how can the other person grow? How can I help that person do that? How can I, as your husband, be asking, am I asking myself daily, how can I help Sofia become Sofia? This is not just how can I help Sofia get the dishes done and take care of the daily business that we have to take care of. It's very easy to get absorbed in that. I think that's one reason that, don't we all experience that in marriage, of you just kind of get swept along. There's so much to do, and you can lose the focus of why did we get married anyway? What are we most of all about here? It's not just to get by.
Yeah. So give me some practical examples of how, I mean, it can be also just in friendship in general. How do two friends live that life of virtue together? And then, of course, the way you would live it in marriage might be a little bit different, but I would imagine the same. Can you give us some examples of that in action? What are some practical examples?
Well, how about this? When I lecture on friendship, just as it were, normal friendship, the way I put the kind of practical payoff of what friends do as they grow in virtue together, the practical payoff is learn to hold one another accountable. And I mean, this is the main way. Aristotle's so clear on this. Humans, to grow in virtue, need a good friend to hold them accountable. Marriage is a special gift empowering precisely that situation. So I'd say it's the holding one another accountable. Now, again, that can sound kind of bone dry. It can even sound kind of scary. Is this just kind of a lot of judgmentalism and a lot of pointing out to the other where the other's falling short? This is where we have to go back to the principle of what friendship is in the first place. This true virtuous friendship that's rooted in a real knowledge, in a real love. When that is really what's animating here, it's other-centered. It's not coming from a kind of complaining, you're failing me in this way. You're not holding up your end of the bargain right now. Because, when that's what starts to animate, if that's what we think of when we think of holding the other accountable, then this seems to be more of, it's not really an exercise of friendship. It's more of a simply what I need from you and how I'm disappointed that you're not doing it, and now I'm going to hold you accountable.
Yeah, kind of keeping a tally. Which is
so
terrible.
This is
horrible.
This is hard, because at this moment, a spouse can have the experience of, well, I mean, that means I really, really have to have this kind of other-centered love, where it's just what really moves me and animates me is a concern. The first thing that I see if my spouse is falling short is not how she is falling short of kind of taking care of me, holding up her end of the bargain, but how she's falling short of being her, and how hard this must be, how sad this is, how much how I want to make this right. When that's the spirit, imagine the beauty of the reaching out in a supportive way, a truly supportive and loving way. And again, it's a conversation, I think, for another time, of the specific ways we're going to enact that accountability. But right now, I just really want to secure that principle of that at the heart of our relationship is figuring out concretely how, well, first of all, making sure we testing ourselves, examining ourselves. Do we have the right disposition? That this is what we want, that this is what we're looking for, and that we can count on that from the other. And that's where we need to begin, I think, in kind of looking at, has our friendship become, our marriage become, have we become the kind of friends that we want it to be? this is the root. It's not going to be in the little details of what's going wrong in our communication. We're not going to fix this just by getting the right method of communication.
Although that's helpful.
That's going to be very helpful, and we want to talk about that.
Yeah.
But it is our heart where our heart needs to be, or
Sure.
do we need to kind of rekindle that, re-choose, refocus? Because otherwise, all the other little tricks of setting of communication and of setting things right are not going to work.
So just to recap, so in friendship, the two kind of characteristics that we're looking at in friendship are seeing the other and affirming their good. And then the second is to pursue a life of virtue together, to hold one another accountable in that pursuit. Is there, so obviously there's a non-married way of enacting that. And then we're talking about how to enact that in a marriage. What are the particular challenges that you see that a marriage relationship presents to this endeavor that's maybe not the case in friendships outside of marriage? What are some of the particular challenges you think?
And get ready, because I'm going to turn that right back to you, because
oh dear,
I don't know, you've had experience of the challenges of friendship in marriage, and I do want to hear. So I'm going to choose one. The kind of the pressure that we feel to perform in this particular relationship, and if we don't get this right, and we tend to feel very guilty, and it's very terrifying. A, if I'm falling short, I feel guilty about that. B, if my spouse is in any way falling short, it's like, well, what do I do now? So I think one of the biggest challenges in the whole marital friendship thing is just that there is a big pressure, because in many ways our marriage is at the center of our life, and to the extent that this is not functioning as it should, it's going to be with us every moment of the day. So the very intensity of our being together is the kind of thing that, to the extent that it's not working right, it's just going to keep rubbing and grinding again and again and again. I think many of us in various ways kind of experience that, of we know something's not right here, we're not exactly sure what it is, and it's very easy for that to kind of grow into a kind of established walls of kind of hurt and discouragement. And so then we just learn to get by. We just settle into okay, well, this will work. Maybe it's for the sake of the children, or just for the sake of not upsetting the cart. Well, we have to stay married at this point. So that's just one that I want to choose. There's certainly a lot of others. I'm going to turn it back to you. What and you could even go personal, too personal, but what do you see as the challenge in marriage?
Well, for me, one of the things that I've experienced is a very big challenge, and kind of looking around me, I think that there are many people who experience the same thing, is that on the one hand, it's this incredible meeting of hearts and of wanting the good and wanting a common life, and then encountering there's a real difference. So there's a real difference in stride between you and your spouse. First of all, just the gender difference is pretty extraordinary. And so I like to describe it as a difference in stride, because it's almost like a man just has a different way of functioning than a woman. So it's almost very often men are taller than women. It's not always the case, but I like to think of it as stride. His stride is different from hers. And when you're trying to walk together, that's really
good image.
Tricky. That's really
good
hard.
Image.
So the male-female difference has been a really big difficulty in the pursuit of friendship, partially because I think we see the good that we're trying to pursue very much through the filter of our gender. And it's hard sometimes for us to step outside of that and see and appreciate, which is the first principle you said of friendship, to see and appreciate the other person's mode of existence.
Right.
And that has been a very long row to hoe for me, a long, slow process of learning, which I have to say is just so enriching. And I still feel like there's a long way to go. So, gender difference is one of the things. And then just on top of that, differences of taste and especially interest in the modes of relaxation the way people loosen the bowstring. When there's a difference in that regard, that can be a real rub or trial in friendship, in marriage. So those are practical things. I think those are two of the most, because of course we
great.
have, difficulties arise over prudential decisions over children and things like that, but that's not specifically threatening friendship. But I would say that the gender difference and difference in tastes and habits.
Well, that frankly, you went for what would have been my next one, and I think we need to talk about. And Aristotle has some help for us, believe it or not, on
Good
this.
news.
Of go back to another principle about friendships. One of the basic ones that hasn't been mentioned. Friendship is always rooted in sameness. Because it's about shared life, there has to be a fundamental sameness. Of course, there's room for some difference, but at the end of the day, shared life is in fundamentally joining into one project that we're able to enter into together. And to the extent that we are fundamentally different, or different in big ways, and then even, again, there can be a certain amount of difference, but in general, difference is a challenge. It's a small thing. You and I have used the example in our own reflecting on this before, of the fact that I really like to hike and that you don't like to hike. You might say, "Oh, this is no big deal." And maybe it's not a big deal, but it's a deal, because we share life together, and it's a little bit of a suffering for both of us that we don't share that. It's manageable, but it shows something of a principle of sharedness, sameness. So Aristotle here, when he talks specifically about the relationship between a husband and wife, using it as an example where there is just, for starters, there is always an intrinsic and enduring difference, a difference that will never be overcome, at least not directly overcome. It can turn to be a great fruit when we use that difference rightly, but it's not difference to be made to go away. I just say that, for instance, as opposed to if we were just talking about a friendship between, say, a man and a man, and there was an important difference that maybe was one of character. Sometimes that kind of difference we should try to overcome, right? You want to try to bring that other person up. If there's too great a difference in character, you can't really have a virtuous friendship at all. But in general, you're looking to kind of smooth that out and to look to share more. But marriage is unique especially unique. It stands out from all other relationships in this way, that by its nature, given the nature of marriage, it calls for difference. Marriage wasn't designed simply to be a way that two people can be good friends with one another. It's not just simply, hey, this is simply all about how can they thrive together, though it is going to be a uniquely perfect way to thrive together. It has an intrinsic orientation of generosity, especially there, of course, in the children. And if nothing else, that points us in the direction of realizing if marriage is designed to do something very specific, something more than just here's a nice way for two people to live together, then there's going to be these other factors in there that call for masculinity and femininity in their difference from one another. Now, I want to follow that immediately by saying, I mean, here we see the astounding power of God in designing something so wonderful, where what ends up being for the good of the children in the broader community, also, when recognized, when lived, when we discover the plan, when we affirm the plan, when we live the plan, it is going to be a wonderful, uniquely powerful way for us to live together in friendship. But my point there is just that there needs to be a difference given what marriage is. It calls for that difference, which will be a unique and ongoing challenge for the friendship. And I think this is a reason that there's so many marriages that they, in a sense, shoulda, coulda been those deeper friendships, but they don't become that because of this challenge that you've brought up, the difference between the sexes, the difference which isn't some cruel trick. It has a reason. It is ours to discover that reason. And here I close with, here's Aristotle's great insight. What the key to living out and kind of thriving in the context of the difference is that each spouse must do his and her best to understand the difference, to affirm that difference, even love it, and then live it out. So that's going to be a real challenge, and that's going to be the glory when we get it right.
Yeah. So to put it in practical terms, the male female difference, let's say there's, some habit that is a very masculine habit. Let's just say even the way a man might analyze this domestic situation, and you go into a conversation or discussion about it, and there's something very almost abstract and objectivizing about it. And let's say a woman's approach to looking at that situation is much more personal. It's much more, small details, much more, rather than just try to just look at resolving the frustration that can come from that encounter of a different approach of looking at the same situation. That, let's say, I'm going to say from a woman's perspective, since I'm imagining myself in this situation, is that rather than try to make your husband see it the way you do, that you are able to step back and see a bigger picture and see that there's a value in the way he's approaching the situation, and that you can see how a mixture of the two is a good. So you appreciate his approach while all at the same time not backing off of yours necessarily, that you're bringing that to enrich the relationship. So recognizing, appreciating, and embracing the difference doesn't in any way imply that you're trying to erase the difference by either making the other become like me or by giving up my unique difference and simply becoming like my spouse, right?
I think that's right.
And so it's really, I guess, and I think that this is maybe kind of a exercise in marriage that we can get better at through practice of, on the one hand, appreciating your spouse's approach and perspective, and at the same time, not losing our own. And maybe that's the gift that spouses give to one another while staying strong in your own, that you give the other the space, the opportunity, and you actually help them to remain true to theirs, as long as it's within virtue, right? So when we're not talking about, as you said earlier, if it's an issue of doing something wrong or bad, like not the sense of wrong of, oh, we disagree, but if it's something that is going to actually harm one of the spouses, by a choice that's not virtuous. We're not talking about that kind. We're talking about other differences that we actually want to recognize them so we can support them, strengthen them, encourage them in one another, so that we become more masculine and more feminine. And then together we can have a bigger picture.
I think that's very well said. There's a lot here. When I think about this, I often the French line comes to mind: "Vive la différence." Here is a very important instance of it is of the design. It's of the plan that there be this difference, often for a reason we don't yet see. And so I think that's where we need to recognize, from the viewpoint of friendship, we can just find ourselves thinking, why do we have to be so different? Right? You and I, we've joked about this often.
I say it all the time.
I mean, it just comes to the point sometimes where you're just thinking, who could possibly have set this up this way?
I know, who thought this was a good idea.
That you would, that a woman actually thinks it would approach these things this way. It just seems so outlandish that and can really be this kind of wedge between us, just thinking, well, forget this. I mean, how am I supposed to relate to that? Right. Well, boy, I mean, what a lesson we can learn if we stop and we remember, okay, we're married. A man and a woman get married. There's a difference between a man and a woman in marriage for a reason. Now, I mean, sometimes the difference might come out in a slightly ugly way, and we have to recognize that sometimes it's not okay. Well, this difference, this is exactly the way God wanted it to be. But nonetheless, just to recognize this difference that does often make it hard for us to communicate in certain ways, to understand or to enter into this project in an understanding way. It's because of what was needed, say, especially and often by the children. For the sake of the children, there needed to be this difference between their parents. And are we willing to accept that and integrate that into our relationship? Recognizing, again, the good news is in the end, it doesn't just end up being cruel and, well, I guess this stinks, but just for the good of the children, we'll do it. It actually ends up being redounding back to the good of our marriage. Just like you had said earlier, Sophia, that in a sense, isn't that friendship that you are working through growing in virtue? In many ways, this is marriage, working through discovering those differences and being willing to accept them and eventually, hopefully, rejoice in them because they are a gift not only to others, but to us and our relationship too.
Yeah. So it's the difference not for division, but for unity, for a fuller unity.
Exactly. Exactly. Unity with the difference. If you crush the difference, you'll have a unity
You'll
of
have the
sameness,
same.
which is
not as rich.
That's not marriage.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, if you turn a man into a woman, if you turn a woman into a man, if you are usurping one another's places. And this is delicate because, of course, part of the beauty is we are learning from one another.
Sure.
We are so concretely, right? A woman in a greater attention to, say, the emotional needs of a child or of people in general. I mean, how often do men get to, as it were, benefit from? Women are really more attentive to the emotional needs of individuals. That's not just the children. That's normally me too. Whereas I'm a little bit more, abstracted and not so good at being attentive to the needs of individuals. By the way, that's a problem for you because you need me, frankly, to learn something from you.
For sure.
So I do it towards the children, but not just towards the children, towards you too. So that balance of, we need to learn from one another's differences and grow in that way, because whatever it is that a woman tends to naturally excel in and a man naturally excel in, at the end of the day, they are ways of being good as a human person. They're kind of human perfections, good human qualities that we all should be cultivating, but not conflating man and woman. But we can see this in experience. In a beautiful marriage, it's nice to visualize success. You have a woman who, while remaining very feminine, has learned from and has developed certain things that her husband, by the grace of God, by great work, again, we're visualizing success, had patterned, that she has grown from. But she hasn't become masculinized in some kind of negative way. She still remains very feminine. I almost dare say more feminine. And the exact same thing on the other side. The good man has had to learn key things from his wife, become more like her, while never giving up their unique and distinctive roles. Sophia, I really do think that one of the biggest hindrances to friendship and marriage is not embracing the difference, loving the difference, living the difference in all that entails.
I just want to go back to something that you said, kind of in passing, but you said sometimes the difference can be highlighted in an ugly way. And it just occurred to me when you were saying that to the extent that we fall away from virtue, the difference becomes an alienating and abusive kind of power. And so it's almost kind of like the virtue that is the work of friendship is actually what is requisite to make the differences become something that through which you can be united, right? So, I mean, I just, as soon as you said that, I felt that experientially that there to the extent that I've persisted in selfishness or any other kind of vice, it has made it so that the difference between me from you as a woman to a man has become kind of ugly. The conversations or contacts or conflicts that we have, where I haven't grown beyond certain narrownesses, make that conversation be very ugly and painful and hurtful rather than productive, growing together, furthering mutual insight and appreciation of the other. And so it seems that it's, again, we're going back to virtue, how important it is. And this is something that, we said originally that the goal of friendship is to help the other to grow in virtue. And of course, that is the incredible gift of friendship, that you have support in doing that. It's something you can't really do by yourself. But I would like to just underscore that at the same time, it is something that should be, as spouses, should be our personal individual goal, that we grow in virtue. And sometimes it's hard for us to see where those areas of deficiency are because they're so close to us and they're so familiar. And frankly, a lot of these places that we fall away from virtue are ways of protecting ourselves, where we have a long-standing existing wound, really. And that's, I think, one of another challenge to friendship and marriage is that we come to our marriage with all kind of pre-existing wounds and habits of protecting ourselves from those wounds. Yeah. And then we go into a situation where neither of us are aware of the other person who's coming at you with all kinds of weapons out for protection already, when you didn't really realize there was going to be, firearms involved. Metaphorically, I'm not speaking actually, but anyway, so it just felt kind of in your saying that one of the things that has on a practical level made it easier for me to grow in friendship with you is to try to grow in self-knowledge and a self-examination of where are my weaknesses in virtue that are preventing me from being able to fully see you and to express myself to you. So just kind of, I heard someone once say, the thing you most dislike or most irritates you in your spouse is the thing that you most hate in yourself. But you can see it in your spouse because your spouse is facing you, but you can't see it in you because it's too close to you. And when I first heard that, I thought, well, I'm not sure about that. The way I heard it is the thing you can't stand the most in someone who bothers you. It wasn't necessarily your spouse, although of course it applies. And I just thought, well, this person who really bothers me, I'm generally a pretty peace-loving person. I don't really have a lot of enemies. But there was one person who was really bothering me. I thought, I don't have anything in common with this person, I assure you. And then I thought, okay, well, let's just push the experiment a little farther. Let's see. And I, shockingly realized upon digging and realizing, just kind of looking more closely and being super honest, that in fact, I did the thing that I hated most about this person. Actually, I had that issue also, just mine was dressed up differently. And so it was a very convenient way. It was dressed in a way that made it very convenient for me to not recognize it in myself. And so all of a sudden I just thought, wow, this person I can't stand, that I just consider as such a burden to my life, is actually a gift to me, because I can't really see in myself, because unless you have a mirror, you can't see yourself. I can't see in myself the work I need to do. But in some ways, your spouse or your friend or your people around you can become that mirror for you if you have the eyes to see. Because we're working on this thing together in marriage, but the reality is you can really only change yourself. You can't change your spouse. So so I think that's kind of important.
Help, but that right there makes me think that we have to take up the issue of what about where what one spouse isn't particularly interested in this, or someone listening right now to this conversation is saying, well, this all sounds great, but it presupposes that people have a certain disposition to make this happen. And I think to some extent that is true. This does presuppose that both have a certain disposition to make this happen. And so our first hope is that we might all work in that direction. and recognize that beginning with ourselves. Do I have the disposition I need to have?
Mm-hmm.
And am I willing to do some self-examination here and grow in self-knowledge? That was an excellent point you were making about how we can learn about ourselves by what we're disliking in others.
Mm-hmm.
And that certainly shows up in a special way in marriage. That said, sometimes our spouse is going to have a problem where it's just a problem, and we don't see it as a problem because it's our problem, but it is their problem, right?
Yeah.
And and so maybe before we wrap up, we should just give a thought or two. Do you have anything that you would say if someone just as part of this conversation is saying, wish I could do that, don't know how to bring this up, don't know that my spouse is in the zone to kind of gird up
Mm-hmm.
and
And
grow
do
in
their part.
virtue together, what would
Yeah.
you say?
Well, first of all, I would say that is an incredibly painful situation to be in. It's a very difficult situation. It's very real. I think many people find themselves in that situation, maybe partially because we're not really taught um, at a time in our life where we're not pursuing a spouse, but we're pursuing friends. We're not actually taught how to pursue real friendship. And so when we are choosing a spouse, it's not with an eye toward, are we going to be able to live that life together, pursuing virtue with them, and don't find out until after marriage and many years maybe into marriage that actually we're not on the same project. So that's actually very, very difficult. And first of all, just not to take let's take the less extreme version where maybe one spouse becomes awakened to the need to work together and the other one's not there yet.
Yep.
So I think first of all, it's very appropriate and beautiful for if one of the spouses has had kind of an awakening through understanding or knowledge, what is it that we could be pursuing together that could improve our relationship, that of course sharing that in a courteous way with your spouse who maybe is not there yet. So you can certainly be a means of bringing that kind of opening of awareness to your spouse by telling them what you're hearing or reading or what you've reflected on in always a loving and kind way. So not you should, but I've discovered something, or I've recently realized I'd like to invite you to see it this way. I can't wait to tell you about.
Yep.
And so very often that's really a beautiful way to invite a spouse who's not yet awakened into kind of a mutual project of taking your marriage friendship to another level and increasing it as a friendship of virtue. Now, there are sometimes circumstances where it's not a matter of awakening, but it's a kind of a matter of maybe obdurateness. The spouse just isn't interested. And that is so, so difficult because basically what that means is the spouse who's interested in pursuing greater virtue ends up kind of having to do it by themselves. And it's not really designed to be that way. So I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that's a real suffering involved there.
And it happens.
And it
might not be able to be significantly changed.
Yes,
perhaps
exactly.
As long as you left.
And I think in that circumstance, it's very important for the spouse who is pursuing something greater or higher in virtue. First of all, recognize the difference. This is where my spouse is. And I can't change them. They have to change themselves, right? So, but that we not use that as an opportunity to shut our spouse out, that we continue to have an open heart to them as our spouse, and continue to be practicing the kind of virtuous from the perspective of, what do I owe my spouse? This is my spouse, and I'm committed to help them as much as I can, bring them to a flourishing in their good. You need to keep doing that, partially because it makes you a certain kind of person. So it's not just because we're hoping to change your spouse, but because it's what you are called to in marriage. And so it's good and fitting and actually will produce a kind of flourishing in you to continue to do your part, even though your spouse is not able to reciprocate in that regard.
Wow. I think you've really hit on something there, dear. And again, it is very painful. But there is something incredibly beautiful. Can we just for a moment, I just feel like I want to say, isn't there something uniquely worthy of awe and reverence in, for instance, a wife who remains true,
Mm-hmm.
who doesn't stab her husband in the back,
Mm-hmm.
who knows just in God's great providence, the man she married is not in whatever way right now really flying at the altitude she is.
Mm-hmm.
It's not really up for that pitch. But she does not lord that over him. She does not speak about him behind his back.
Mm-hmm.
She keeps working to some extent in a way that was not the ideal, more alone. But she keeps doing it, and she keeps loving. There is something uniquely beautiful about that. It's a great suffering. I'm not saying you'd go out and look for it, but in God's great providence, when that happens, that might just be the particular story, the particular beautiful painting of your life and even of this marriage
Mm-hmm.
that's going to reflect the goodness of God and be something that is even can be beautiful for others too, precisely in her unique fidelity, don't you
Mm-hmm.
think?
Yeah, I think so. Now, I have to say, and having said that, I do want to say that there are circumstances in a marriage where the kind of breakdown in the mutual goal of the good of the other is so significant because there is abuse involved, whether it's psychological abuse or physiological abuse, and that's a different situation. Obviously, we're still called to keep our heart open, but for either spouse,
Sure.
both man or
Right.
woman, in
Very
that case,
different
it's very
situation.
important to
No,
pursue counseling and
absolutely.
aid and
No.
helping to ascertain on a practical level that there might need to be a separation
Sure.
required, right? So,
Sure.
so obviously, I feel like we're not
That's
talking
what
about that
we
extreme
need,
situation. I
and we
just
do
want
need
to
to note that.
make
Yeah.
clear that it's not about that being open to your spouse and being faithful to the call in marriage doesn't mean that one has to remain completely silent and never say anything or seek help when there's abuse
Yeah.
involved. It's very important that
Absolutely.
that be reached out
And
for.
as we start to move towards wrapping up, I'm going to ask you for wrapping up thoughts, but I also wanted to note here that sometimes when there is this situation that we've just talked about where, say, I'm just going to do it because it can go either way, but so often in God's providence, it is that a woman kind of is trying to draw her husband more deeply in. And I want to go back to how she goes about that. And again, either way, how one goes about that. I want to go back to a principle early on, real fast, that we talked about in kind of the difference between harping and complaining and holding accountable. We need to look deeply in our hearts. Are we reaching out to the other at this point more out of just a disappointment of you're not what I wanted you to be kind of for me versus really coming from a place of love and wanting you to be who you're called to be. This is a real and significant difference and will be experienced by the other differently.
Mm-hmm.
If and how often does a husband, unfortunately, to go with the example, kind of get a category for, well, my wife is just I'm never gonna be able to please her. And he's just kind of thinking in his mind, I don't think he's experiencing her approaching of him as really coming from a place of, this is out of love for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I know these things are complex, and there is such a real pain that he is probably failing her in some important way, and she has a legitimate complaint there. But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not in any way denying that. But I'm just saying this is something for us to all look again in our hearts. How can we grow in love? How can we choose to really do this, to seek this renewal? Or as you were saying, if it's sharing a renewal, a special grace I've received, I want to bring this to you and share this with you, really to be coming and sharing out of excitement to do this together and out of love. That is the way deeper friends do it. And it's going to be much more likely to be received.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
But do
I
you have
completely second
any
that.
kind of wrap up thoughts here on the challenge of can friendship in marriage be what we hoped it would be?
I think the answer to that is definitely yes, but roll up your sleeves. It doesn't happen for sitting around and watching. I think it's a labor of love, and it's something that has to be the object of your intention, and that it's so worth it. That the work itself becomes part of the experience of that shared common life that really only friendship can bring. So it's like marriage can be so wonderful. And then if you add friendship on top of that, then it's more wonderful still. So I think it's definitely something that we should be striving for, and that can be achieved through a patient work.
And how about this? This is maybe a funny angle to end with, but can it be what we hoped it would be? It certainly takes two to tango, and a friendship will never be what it could have been and that we hoped it would be unless we both are fully engaged.
Mm-hmm.
But we know from experience that often enough, in any case, at least sometimes, it's not going to be a completely mutual thing. And one person is going to be pushing ahead kind of more than the other. Will that friendship in marriage have been all that they hoped it would be? Well, perhaps not. In any case, certainly not what in the abstract we most would have wanted. But it too can be something very beautiful just by the fidelity on the one side, in a bearing of these principles in mind, and as appropriate, a loving and persevering, acting as a friend from the one side,
Mm-hmm.
even if that's not fully reciprocated itself, will be blessed with great fruits. And who knows? Who knows? That might be exactly what calls forth that reciprocation. And it becomes, lo and behold, in the end, what we had always hoped it would be. Yeah. So, by the grace of God and a lot of hard work, thanks very much for talking about this with me, my dear. And it's great to share that with others. This makes us think of a number of other more specific things that came up here that we'll want to have some more conversations about and go further into.
Well, sounds good to me. I always enjoy the conversation.
Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.